Olivia and I sing well together, and it was a best duet, I think, because it suited the male voice and it suited the female voice. Quite often it's very difficult for a male to sing with a female because...
Not every love story ends in happily ever afters. For 50 years, Cliff Richard loved one woman who didn't choose him. She married his best friend, later married someone else, and died in Cliff Richard's arms. He never recovered from the heartbreak, never married, never had children. Cliff just kept singing until he vanished from the spotlight, leaving the world stunned. Today, Susan Hampshire reveals why Cliff Richard vanished from the spotlight. Was it heartbreak or something more? How broken is broken enough? Join us in this video as we peel through the emotional twists surrounding Cliff Richard. The assault that did it, Susan Hampshire, reveals why Cliff Richard vanished. For Susan Hampshire, knowledge about the secrets within Cliff Richard's life began from their time together on the set of the musical Wonderful Life. Before she made her mark in film and TV, Hampshire started out as a theater actress. In 1961, she played the lead in an audio version of Little Black Sambo for the His Master's Voice Junior Record Club, with words by David Croft and music by Cyril Ornadell. She also showed off her singing skills on the midday show when Anglia Television launched in 1959. Her first big film role came in 1960 with During One Night. 2 years later, she landed the lead in the BBC's 1962 adaptation of What Katie Did. That performance caught the attention of Walt Disney, who cast her in The Three Lives of Thomasina alongside Patrick McGoohan, and later in The Fighting Prince of Donegal. She and McGoohan would reunite on screen again in 2 episodes of Danger Man. In 1964, she co-starred with Cliff Richard in the musical Wonderful Life, directed by Sidney J. Furie. According to speculations, the time on set with Cliff Richard sparked enough interest in him until his sudden disappearance from the spotlight. This puts her in a better place to know the true situation of whatever took him out of the spotlight. Cliff Richard became a global musical sensation early in his career, dominating the UK and US charts for weeks on end. However, his personal life was a barrage of tumult. On August 14, 2014, after years of topping global charts, Cliff Richard, now choosing to enjoy the slower and peaceful kind of life, was relaxing at his place in Portugal when he turned on the TV. Some say it was a coincidence, others say it was fated for him that day, because what he saw that day nearly made his heart stop. Live on screen, helicopters were circling above his home in Berkshire, and police officers were going through his personal belongings. They looked like burglars, but this wasn't a robbery. It was a full-blown police raid, televised across the globe thanks to a secret deal between the BBC and South Yorkshire Police. And Cliff Richard got destroyed. A fatal blow to his public image and reputation. He was 77 at the time, a national icon with a clean record and decades of service in the music world. Now, he was on his knees in the kitchen, sobbing. The images were everywhere, from the UK to Australia. It was too much to take. During his court testimony, Cliff cried as he read out the list of countries that had broadcast footage of his private life being torn apart. For a 77-year-old man who had made his mark in the industry, there had to be an explanation. What do you think must have provoked such a violent raid on live television? Let's find out. The allegations against Cliff Richard. Cliff Richard's troubles began with a single allegation. A man in his 40s claimed that Cliff Richard had assaulted him in 1985 during a Billy Graham rally at Bramall Lane Stadium. The rally was a very large event that lasted over 5 nights, attracting over 200,000 attendees. At the event, Cliff had taken the stage to support the Christian cause he'd backed since 1966, oblivious that an accusation would stem from it. The accusation quickly began to unravel. The accuser described a room with sports equipment as the site of the alleged assault, but records showed that room didn't even exist at the time, and the equipment he described was stored elsewhere entirely. However, the police pursued the case for 22 months, ignoring eyewitness statements from Cliff's security detail, officers who had been with him the whole time and weren't even interviewed. The investigation cost $800,000 and led to 0 charges. Yet the damage had already been done. The raid on Cliff's Berkshire home, filmed live due to a secret arrangement between the BBC and South Yorkshire Police, was aired across the world, turning Cliff's personal trauma into a global spectacle. Behind the scenes, Cliff was falling apart. He later admitted to slipping into depression, suffering from insomnia, shingles, extreme weight loss, and fatigue so severe he sometimes collapsed. His home no longer felt like a sanctuary. Even routine parts of his career, like releasing music or promoting his autobiography, became impossible under the weight of suspicion and scandal that had no basis in fact. Everything in Cliff's life came to a halt because people stopped seeing him as a person. They only saw the headlines. Then, something even stranger happened. Just after the police raid was broadcast, a man tried to blackmail Cliff. He threatened to spread false stories unless he was paid. The man was arrested, but oddly, the original abuse claim he made was still taken seriously by investigators. So even though this person tried to extort Cliff using the raid, his story was treated as credible. Eventually, Cliff received $400,000 in damages from South Yorkshire Police, who admitted they had acted unlawfully by tipping off the BBC. They gave a public apology, but no apology can undo the trauma. Even large legal payouts, millions in this case, can't heal the emotional damage. The BBC alone spent nearly $2 million on legal fees and damages. But for Cliff, that wasn't the point. He was frustrated that prosecutors said there was insufficient evidence to press charges. To him, that sounded too vague. He wanted it clearly stated. There was no evidence, none at all. That lingering doubt, that cloud of suspicion, was what hurt the most. "I feel I've been smeared," he said, not by the police, but by the BBC. In court, he broke down as he spoke about his fear that the damage to his reputation would never go away, even though he had done nothing wrong. He later told members of Parliament that being named publicly had changed how he looked people in the eye. He felt like people would always wonder, even if he had been cleared. And he had every reason to feel that way. His name had been splashed across front pages. His face was shown on TV while police carried out a raid that led to nothing. Years of work and respect were nearly erased by one moment, one rumor, and a media storm. In July 2018, Cliff won his privacy case against the BBC. The judge ruled that he had a right to privacy and that the BBC had violated it in a serious and sensational way. The ruling changed how the media in the UK could report on police investigations moving forward. But for Cliff, it wasn't just about the court win, it was about surviving. It was about making sure people knew this wasn't just unfair, it was inhumane. He never got those 2 years back. He never got to erase the headlines or the looks from strangers. And he knew that, no matter what, his name would always carry a shadow, always remembered for the wrong reason. What other troubles plagued Cliff Richard's life enough to make him disappear? Let's find out. Cliff Richard's chaotic love story. In 1971, on his TV show It's Cliff Richard, and at about the peak of his career, Cliff introduced the world to a young Australian singer, Olivia Newton-John. She was 22 at the time, and the chemistry between them was instant. Cliff later said, I knew right away she was a friend for life. He wasn't wrong. They stayed close for over 50 years. But what fans didn't know until Cliff's 2020 autobiography was that he had fallen in love with her. When I, and many of us, were in love with Olivia, she was engaged to someone else. I lost my chance, he wrote, adding that everyone who knew her eventually fell for her. She was engaged to Bruce Welch, Cliff's own bandmate from The Shadows. Olivia met Bruce in 1968 while opening for the group, and their relationship was intense and tabloid-fueled, complicated by the fact that Bruce was still married. Though engaged for 5 years, they never made it to the altar. All the while, Olivia was working closely with Cliff, touring, recording, and performing beside him. When she left Bruce in 1973, he spiraled into depression and even self-harmed. Rumors swirled. Had she fallen for Cliff instead? No one said it aloud, but the silence was telling. Still, despite all the emotional entanglements, Cliff and Olivia kept performing together, creating duets that fans still cherish. Their voices blended so naturally that Cliff often said, "Olivia had a kind of grace no one else could match." Their final duet came in October 2015 during Cliff's 75th birthday concert at Royal Albert Hall, where they sang "Suddenly, One Last Time." In 2023, Cliff paid tribute to Olivia in his album Cliff with Strings, My Kind of Life, using that live recording as a farewell to a friendship and a love that spanned decades. Cliff never married, and it seemed Olivia had left a mark that never faded. He added that everyone who knew her eventually fell for her. 3 weeks before Olivia died, Cliff called her. They were friends until old age, but to Cliff, they should have been more. On the call, Olivia was upbeat, warm, and cheerful as always. "Good day, Cliff. How are you, darling?" she said. She didn't sound like someone about to die. Cliff later wrote, "I never thought for one moment during that call that I'd be writing this." Olivia had battled breast cancer for 30 years. She was a fighter, but never let her pain show. When she passed on August 8, 2022, Cliff was crushed. "I hate that word," he said, referring to death. Instead, he said she had simply stopped living. It was his way of coping with the silence she left behind. She was the absolute love of his life, but life was smart enough to keep them apart forever. How did Cliff Richard become such a legendary musical sensation? Keep watching to find out. How he became Richard Cliff. Harry Roger Webb was born at King George's Hospital in Lucknow, British India, in 1940. The world around him was already deep in turmoil. World War II was raging, and calls for Indian independence were growing louder. By 1946, during the events of Direct Action Day, riots broke out, and many British families began fleeing the colony. The Webb family was among them. Harry's father worked in the colonial service, but by 1948, it was clear the British Empire was crumbling. Instead of flying home, the family boarded a crowded, aging ship, the SS Ranchi, for a long, uncertain journey across the Indian Ocean. For 3 weeks, the ship carried dozens of families like theirs, people leaving behind the only life they had ever known. The Webbs eventually settled in a modest home in Kelvedon, Surrey, a far cry from the warmth and comfort of India. For young Harry, things would never be the same again. Life had become a struggle, but it also lit a fire in him. He felt he had something to prove, to make something meaningful out of this strange new life. This marked the beginning of a transformation. Shortly after, his musical genuine was born. A man named Harry Greatorex, who had a knack for spotting stars, saw something special in the young performer and was willing to nurture it. But first, his name had to change. "You need a name that sounds like rock," he told him. "Cliff. It's British, solid, like a cliff face." As for the last name? Richard, inspired by the explosive energy of American rock star Little Richard. And just like that, Cliff Richard was born, not just in name, but in purpose. He wasn't just reinventing himself, he was about to change British music forever. It all began with a song called Move It. Move It hit the airwaves on August 29, 1958, and nothing sounded like it. Loud, raw, and rebellious, it was the total opposite of the clean-cut pop music of the time. Cliff Richard was just 18 years old, and his debut song was a shock to the system. It soared to number 2 on the UK charts, marking a turning point in British music. British teens finally had their own rock star. The most unique aspect of Cliff's journey was that he wasn't just copying American rock and roll, he was creating something new and authentic. That one song, Move It, opened the door for a generation of British musicians to follow. Bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and many more. But it wasn't just about the music. It was about the chaos it unleashed. When Cliff went on tour later that year, Britain went wild. Girls screamed, cried, and even fainted. The boys felt like he was stealing the spotlight. The crowds were so massive and frenzied that security couldn't control them. It was like Elvis, but it was happening in Leeds, London, and Manchester. The press had a name for it: Cliff Panic. And the madness kept growing. In 1959, Cliff released a song he didn't even like. "I thought it was too weak and fake," he admitted. But his band changed the arrangement, slowing it down into something more like a country hymn. That song, Living Doll, became a massive hit. Number 1 for 6 straight weeks, with 770,000 copies sold. In November, he was awarded a silver disc. By January, it had turned gold. He followed it up with Travel in Light, which stayed at number 1 for another 5 weeks. Between the two songs, Cliff sold over 1 million records, something no British artist had ever done before. What is stardom to an 18-year-old boy? How did this early stardom transform Cliff's life? Let's see. Cliff Richard, the high points of stardom. Hollywood took notice of this young star, and that same year, Cliff made his film debut in Serious Charge, a gritty, dramatic movie that tackled tough subjects like false accusations and homosexuality, controversial themes at the time. He was just 19, and people were shocked he agreed to take on such a serious role. A year later, he switched gears and starred in Espresso Bongo, a satirical film that poked fun at the music industry. Cliff was quickly proving he could do more than just sing. He could act, take risks, and redefine what a British pop star could be. By the early 1960s, it was clear Cliff Richard wasn't just a teen idol. He had bigger dreams. He wanted to be more than a pop star. And in Britain, no one had really done that before. Then came the summer holiday. The film premiered in London on January 10, 1963, and chaos erupted. 3,000 fans packed Leicester Square, and Cliff got stuck in his car, unable to make it to his own movie premiere. But that didn't matter. The buzz was already unstoppable. Before the film even hit theaters nationwide, the soundtrack shot straight to number 1 on the UK albums chart and stayed there for an incredible 14 weeks. The songs from the movie became instant classics. The Next Time, Bachelor Boy, Summer Holiday, and even the Shadows' instrumental Foot Tapper all reached number 1. The film itself became the second biggest box office hit of 1963, just behind From Russia with Love. That same year, Cliff was voted the UK's favorite movie star. Then, the Beatles arrived, and everything changed. People assumed Cliff's time was up, but he wasn't going anywhere. In 1964, right in the heart of Beatlemania, Cliff scored 6 top 10 hits. The Beatles only had 5. Songs like On the Beach and I Could Easily Fall in Love with You kept him front and center in the public eye. While the Beatles were shaking up the music scene and taking over America, Cliff continued doing things his way at home. That summer, a showdown of sorts played out in cinemas across Britain. Summer Holiday was still going strong, and the Beatles released their first film, A Hard Day's Night. Both broke records. But British fans hadn't forgotten who paved the way. Even Paul McCartney gave Cliff his credit, once saying that Cliff had already set the stage in Britain before the Beatles ever made their way to Hamburg. Even John Lennon once admitted it. Before Move It and Cliff Richard, there wasn't really any good rock music coming out of England. That says a lot. Then something surprising happened in 1965. New Musical Express held a global fan poll asking readers to vote for the best male singer in the world. Cliff Richard didn't just make the list, he topped it. He beat out Elvis Presley, John Lennon, and Paul McCartney. Keep in mind, this was the same year the Beatles released Help and Rubber Soul, and Elvis still had a huge fan base. So why did Cliff win? Because he kept evolving. The world around him was changing fast, but Cliff didn't try to copy the Beatles or chase trends. He stayed true to himself, blending catchy pop songs, uplifting films, and a sense of wholesome charm that resonated with fans around the world. To many, Cliff was a constant, a rock, before, during, and after the British invasion. Then, in June 1966, Cliff Richard did something that stunned everyone. He walked out on stage at Earl's Court, not to perform, but to stand beside American evangelist Billy Graham and publicly declare his faith in Jesus Christ. It was bold, it was unexpected, and it was deeply personal. But it wasn't a sudden decision. It was the result of a 2-year spiritual journey that had slowly transformed his life. For fans who saw him as Britain's answer to Elvis or Little Richard, the announcement was a shock. Some cried. Others stood speechless. The man they had idolized for being cool, rebellious, and a little edgy had just taken a stand for something far deeper: his faith. At a time when rock stars were expected to push boundaries, rebel, and avoid talking about anything sacred, Cliff went the other way. He wasn't following the rules of fame, he was rewriting them. And in doing so, he proved that being a pop star didn't mean you had to lose your soul. In an industry designed to break wills and men, was his new faith going to cost him? Keep watching. Let's find out. Just when we thought he was done, Cliff Richard's musical brilliance. By the mid-1970s, Cliff Richard's career hit a serious slump. In 1975, for the first time since he started, he didn't have a single song in the charts. Whispers began to spread. Maybe his time was over. Maybe the clean-cut kid from the 50s had finally run out of steam. Then came Devil Woman. Released in April 1976, it was unlike anything Cliff had done before. The song told a strange, haunting story about a psychic and an abandoned cat, and it rocked. It was edgy, mysterious, and a little dangerous. Audiences loved it. The single shot to number 9 in the UK and number 6 in the US, his first ever top 10 hit across the Atlantic. It sold over 2 million copies and proved Cliff wasn't done. Not even close. Even more surprising, the rock world embraced him. Legends like Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, and Elton John were spotted wearing badges that read, "I'm nearly famous." in support of Cliff's comeback album. These weren't casual nods. They were full-on endorsements from some of music's most respected figures. One critic even claimed Cliff's new record outshone the best of Marvin Gaye. The narrative had flipped. Cliff Richard wasn't just back. He was finally being taken seriously as a rock star. And he didn't stop there. In 1987, Cliff released Always Guaranteed, his first album of original material in over 25 years. At a time when pop was flooded with cheesy synths and throwaway hooks, Cliff chose a timeless sound. Working again with producer Alan Tarney, who had helped shape the Thriller-era pop vibe, Cliff crafted a record that struck gold, literally. The album went platinum in the UK, climbed to number 5 on the charts, and stayed there for 24 weeks. It sold over 1.3 million copies, with 4 singles landing in the UK top 40. One of them, Some People, sold 250,000 copies on its own and went silver. Even in the late 80s, Cliff was outpacing the trends and the competition. Then came Christmas 1988. Cliff released Mistletoe and Wine, a gentle, heartfelt Christmas song filled with soft prayer and a bit of sparkle, literally. He recorded it in summer, with glitter over the microphone to set the mood. It debuted at number 7, then rocketed to number 1 the following week, where it stayed for 4 straight weeks. In just 6 weeks, it sold 750,000 copies, beating out heavyweights like Kylie Minogue and Phil Collins to become the UK's biggest-selling single of the year. By 2024, Mistletoe and Wine had gone platinum and was still bringing in more than $100,000 a year in royalties. Even after decades in the spotlight, people still couldn't get enough of Cliff Richard. What does the world remember Cliff Richard the most for, and why? Keep watching to find out. The legend of Cliff Richard. Beyond the fame and the record-breaking numbers, Cliff Richard is remembered for something deeper: his unwavering humility, his openness about his faith, and his resilience through life's challenges. He's used his platform not just to entertain, but to uplift, offering a steady, grounded example in a celebrity world often filled with chaos and excess. As one of the most enduring icons in British pop music, Cliff Richard has lived a life that challenges the usual expectations of international stardom. Despite being adored by millions, he's remained a lifelong bachelor, something that sparked a lot of curiosity over the years. While the media often speculated about his love life, it was never defined by scandal, but rather by emotional depth and personal restraint. One of the most touching glimpses into his private world came decades later, through a heartfelt letter he wrote in October 1961 to his first serious girlfriend, Australian dancer Delia Wicks. At just 21 years old, and already in the thick of fame, Richard wrote her a 3-page letter filled with honest emotion. They had been together for 18 months, a long time for someone newly thrust into the spotlight. And in the letter, he shared the pain of choosing between love and his career. He admitted that, as a rising pop star, he felt he had to give up one priceless thing: the chance at a lasting relationship with someone special. It was one of the hardest choices he'd ever made. He hoped it wouldn't hurt her too much, though he knew it likely would. Giving up music, the passion that had become a core part of who he was, simply wasn't something he could imagine doing. Cliff Richard also opened up about something that weighed heavily on him: his deep sense of responsibility to his family. After the sudden loss of his father, he felt it was up to him to support his mother and sisters, who had come to depend on him completely. He admitted that show business had become part of who he was, and that he couldn't imagine life without it. In one of the most heartfelt and selfless parts of his letter, Richard gently encouraged Delia Wicks to move on. He wanted her to find happiness with someone who could give her the love and stability she deserved. "Find someone who is free to love you as you deserve to be loved," he wrote, "and someone who is able to marry you." It was a moment of deep emotional maturity, an early glimpse into a young man torn between love and responsibility, ultimately choosing a path that would shape the rest of his life. Years later, when Delia Wicks passed away in 2010 at the age of 71 after a battle with cancer, her brother Graham revealed that Richard's decision had left a lasting impact on her. She had been heartbroken by the split. He remembered Richard as a very kind man, and the entire chapter remained a quiet but enduring sorrow. One of those personal costs of fame that the public rarely sees. Just a year after his breakup with Wicks, a 22-year-old Cliff briefly dated British actress Una Stubbs, who was already winning hearts with her charm and energy. Their romance was short-lived, but it reflected his continued search for genuine connection despite the isolating nature of fame. Later in the 1960s, another serious relationship blossomed, this time with dancer Jackie Irving. Richard remembered those years with great affection, describing Jackie as utterly beautiful and recalling how inseparable they had once been. Cliff Richard's relationship with dancer Jackie Irving was far from a casual fling. It was one of the few times he seemed to seriously consider marriage. But, like the romances before it, the pressure of his fame and the complexities of life in the spotlight may have played a role in its quiet end. Irving later went on to marry singer and actor Adam Faith, while Richard was left once again to reflect privately on what could have been. Then came the 1980s, and with them, perhaps the most talked-about relationship of Richard's life, his romance with tennis star Sue Barker. At the time, Barker was a celebrated athlete, having won the French Open and reached the Wimbledon semifinals. When she met Richard in 1982, she was 25 and at the top of her game. Their relationship quickly caught the public's attention, blending the allure of sports fame with pop stardom. Richard, already a beloved national figure, even flew to Denmark to watch her play. And before long, they were seen together at Wimbledon, holding hands, laughing, and clearly close. The photos set off a media storm, with fans and tabloids buzzing. Was Cliff Richard finally ready to settle down? In a 1983 interview, Richard didn't shy away from the subject. He confirmed he was dating Barker and admitted, "I'm seeing Sue, the only girl I want to see at the moment. And if marriage comes on the horizon, I shall relish it." What do you think about Susan Hampshire's revelation of Cliff Richard and why he vanished from the spotlight? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.